Shirey. It is another week of terrible power plays, another week of frustrating hockey. It's the Breakdowns and Breakaways podcast. We get one good episode, maybe like a month and a half. But there are some good things to talk about. And I think that's where we need to stick this week. I would love to sit here and relitigate this power play, and we're 0 for 29 where we're sitting at the recording of this podcast, which is fantastic. Just 0 for 29. Meanwhile, you've got the Coyotes just knocking down Stanley Cup champions like it's going out of style, which maybe we'll get to them later. But Sidney Crosby, we've gone, this is our 12th episode, and I think we have gone 11 episodes without making Sidney Crosby the focal point of an episode. And I feel like for a Penguins-based hockey podcast, that's kind of insane that we've gone 11 episodes and haven't made him the main theme of a podcast. So I want to talk to you about Sidney Crosby and his 25 points in 23 games.
I'm not even concerned about his
goal scoring.
Well,
his 5-on-5.
Yes. Yes.
So he's on pace for a point per game again. I did some digging before we sat down when you talked about wanting to talk about Sid. For players 36 and older, do you know what the record for points in a season is?
I was actually going to look this up on the way over, but I did not have enough time to, so I'm glad you did.
It is Gordie Howe at 40 with 103 points. I think Joe Sakic is second with 100 points in a 06-07. He did that. Gretzky is up there. I think he had 97 after 36. So Sid is on pace for 89 points right now. He's also tied. Well, the last time I checked, he was tied for top 5 in goals. That might have changed because that's been a day or two since I've been online to look at that. Point being, Sidney Crosby is 36 years old, and he is doing things that very, very few people at 36 years old have done. And then you want to get into the 5-on-5 versus power play and everything. So just put in perspective for us the season that Sidney Crosby is having at 36.
So to properly put that in perspective, not to keep hammering on the power play, but Crosby has 3 points on the power play this season. Nikita Kucherov has 20 to give you an idea of
right.
A little bit of the gap that's going on there. On the other hand, it's just so wild, and I think you and I have both kind of brought this up in previous episodes, but we see a lot of star players kind of buoy their production later in their careers with power play points. In Crosby's case, at least over the past 2 seasons, he's been buoying his production with 5-on-5 points. And as of the recording of this podcast going into Wednesday night, Crosby is tied for 3rd in the NHL in 5-on-5 points with 19. So we're talking about a 36-year-old dude in a young man's league doing things that very, very few other people are doing right now, but like you also said, over the course of history.
Right.
So it's really jarring to think about the kind of conversation that we'd be having about him right now if the Penguins' power play was even average.
I mean, if it's an average power play and he's the guy that drives the power play because he's Sidney Crosby. I mean, he's the one that, I realize he's not on the point, but he's the one that things flow through. You could easily say that 3 goes to probably a 10 or a 13, right? So add on another 7 to 10 points on his point total for the season. Now he's on pace for up over 100 points. He's in the top 5, top 10 in scoring for the league, not just in goals. And it's a completely different situation. Now, ifs were, this is reality. The Penguins power play is terrible. But I don't want to get lost in the weeds with the power play right now. What I want to look at is, every podcast, every talk show, every hockey analyst has gone down this road, but we haven't yet. So I want to go down this road with you. he is right now. He had just as of last week or 2 weeks ago, he passed up Guy Lafleur for 25th all time in scoring or in goals. He's going to finish his career in probably the top 10, 12 in points if he stays on these paces.
I'd say that's pretty realistic.
Yeah. He's going to, if the Penguins can get one more playoff run, like decent playoff run, he's probably going to finish his career with 200 playoff games played. He's at 180 right now. Where do you put him all time? Like top player. And now again, these point totals aren't fair because you've got all these injuries that he's dealt with his entire career. If you take away that neck/concussion thing, when he was at his height, you could probably add another 100 points to his totals. And,
oh no, more than that. Yeah.
But being fair, being real, like just being cautiously, like conservative, you could say throw another 100 points. Like you said, probably more, but let's not be a yinzer. Let's be conservative.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you've ever seen on Twitter the Adjusted Hockey Twitter account.
Yes.
So that kind of, for anyone who's not familiar, they're basically taking scoring rates across different eras, and they even break it up season by season and adjusting for it, and then putting players' production
which
on
is
an
wild to look
game
at
basis.
Yeah.
So when you go and look at Crosby's seasons where he was only playing 20-some games, 30-some games when he was dealing with those concussion and neck issues, you look the one crazy season
where he had a 24-game point streak and then got taken out by Steckel in the Winter Classic.
Yeah, if you look at that season on this timeline chart of his career and his adjusted point pace for that season, it was like 144 points or something like that. It was 140 plus.
Scoring was down.
Exactly. Well, that's kind of baked into that equation there, but still, to your point.
Oh, so you're saying that was the adjusted point total? That wasn't his actual point projection?
No, he wasn't on. I don't know what his actual point pace was, but that figure.
I misunderstood you. Yeah, that makes sense.
The scoring rate of that season was baked into the total, but still, to be able to do that in that point in time before the league had really started to shift is really, really impressive.
I think there's less than 7 players in NHL history to have scored 150 points. So the fact that you're even sniffing around that, it's insane to me.
Yeah. Anyway, to get back to your question, where do I have him? I don't know. Especially when you're talking about some of the actual greatest players of all time versus maybe Hall of Fame candidacy, I think the parameters change a little bit. So for like fringe Hall of Fame guys, you're using individual statistics or whatever. But when you're getting into the conversation of the absolute greats, I do think that there is an element of success at the team level and being the person who
drove that success
and was also the quote unquote leader of that success, being the captain, whether it was of the Penguins or Team Canada. Crosby has won everything in the game of hockey that you could possibly want to win.
And I can see him being the type of guy when he retires, just going into like the Spangler Cup just for the hell of it, just to say, hey, I got this one too. What are you going to do now? Right? Like he's that kind of guy. He's that driven. He's the type of guy that if you tell him you can't do something, like Sid, you just can't do that, he'll find a way, and that'll be his mission until he does it. Like he's that type of driven. So let's play the game. All right. I'm gonna give a name. You say yes or no. Bobby Orr, better than Bobby Orr? Yes or no?
Well, better
all time. Okay. No,
better saying would I have Bobby Orr ahead of Crosby
in the pantheon of hockey players? Let me start it like this. In Australian football. Okay.
Okay.
They have their Hall of Fame.
All right.
But they also have a second tier of that Hall of Fame that is called the Immortals, which I freaking love. And that's a really good idea. I think it's like you have your Hall of Fame, but then you have this selection of a handful of Hall of Famers that are considered immortals, right? So obviously Crosby, I would say, is a hockey immortal, quote unquote, right? So here's where I'm at with it. Is his legacy greater or less than Bobby Orr?
Ooh. I would say it's Crosby's isn't greater than Orr's just because of the way that Orr changed the game from the back end in that era.
Yeah, let's say legacy. All right, we're going to go legacy. Top 5 legacies all time. Well, Gretzky is a no.
I don't even think we have to do legacies either. Like, let's just do this. Like, the general top 5 players of all time, I do have Orr. Like, I think I have Crosby in the 5 spot for now, and I do have.
So for me, it goes Gretzky, Lemieux, or Howe, Crosby.
That's mine.
In that order.
Yeah. That would probably be mine as well. You could maybe make an argument that Crosby could be ahead of either
Gordy.
Howe or because Crosby is reaching, even right now, unprecedented levels of consistency.
So I would agree with you about Howe,
but
not Orr.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah.
I'm not even saying I would do that. I'm just saying you could make an argument.
I get you.
But the fact that Crosby has never, ever dipped below a point per game, and I know that he's in a little bit of a better spot now with league-wide scoring being up, scoring rates are up, and that's obviously helping him at this point.
Look at the 80s and the 90s and the early 90s, you know what I mean? Before the dead puck era. Those guys
I also kind of just view it as a leveling out of, like, think about what, and we don't necessarily have to think about because going back to the adjusted hockey stuff that we were talking about a minute ago. But I just view it as kind of like a leveling out of what he could have been doing in the little bit of a lower scoring era.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that he's never dipped below a point per game season, and I believe he actually is tied with Gretzky now, or he's tied with Gretzky this season for most consecutive point per game seasons.
If he gets a point per game this season, I think he passes Gretzky. If I remember that from the preseason correctly.
I think you're right. So,
which, if you're passing Gretzky on anything, that's just a stupid thing.
I mean, how many people can say they took a Gretzky record?
Not many. So then, all right. So that conversation then. So you have him above Yager, you have him above Yzerman, Sakic, Lindstrom, like that whole.
Yes.
I'll give you a name. Like, just I'm gonna kind of take a quick, because I'm always about taking sidetracks and going off.
That's what this show is all about. I'm going to send it off the rails real quick too. It's funny you bring that up because we had a comment on our YouTube when we put it up on YouTube. This was maybe like a month ago, and someone was like, "Love the show, guys. Just a suggestion." It feels like it goes off the rails a little bit. So if you're not aiming for that, maybe have a list of it. It's like, we maybe want it to be organized, but I also like the kind of
we come in with a general idea of what we want to talk about, and then we kind of go from there. And there is a player in NHL history that I do not think gets enough love, and he gets a lot of love, but I don't think it's enough. And I honestly think he should be a top 6 or 7.
Can I take a guess?
Yeah.
You're going to say Fedorov?
No.
I don't know why I thought you were just about to pull Sergei Fedorov out of your butt.
Jean-Beliveau.
Okay. I don't know why I just had
he has
a sense
12 Stanley Cup. Now, granted, it was a 6-team league for his career, and he played on the Canadiens. But still, if you look at that man's career, how Jean Beliveau is not put in the top 7 or 8 more than he is, to me, is just mind-boggling. But that's a different story. That's a hockey geek rant that I'm not maybe ready for yet.
I would also just like to set the record straight that I wouldn't have Fedorov anywhere near that conversation. I just had some odd sense that you were about to say Sergei Fedorov.
Every player under the sun, like Fedorov, like really?
Fedorov was a great player too, but he's not.
Yeah, there's a lot of '90s guys that, like, the nostalgia for me of how they played, and Fedorov's skates, his white skates.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, that's just.
I don't know that an NHL player has ever had as much like legitimate swag as Fedorov has.
Moving off of Sergei Fedorov. So obviously we both agree Sid's a top 5 player. I want to, before we get into the next thing I wanted to talk about real quick, because in my opinion, you can't bring up Sid without bringing up Ovi. Where do you have Ovi?
Ovechkin's a very interesting case for me because in my eyes,
greatest scorer of all time.
Greatest scorer of all time.
Maybe Mike Bossy.
Yeah, but again,
But again,
I'm also
not enough
factoring in the
longevity.
longevity here and the fact that Ovechkin
Fair.
has that
I
longevity
get
in this
that,
era. So I definitely consider him to be the greatest scorer ever. And that means an awful lot because putting the puck in the back of the net is the hardest thing to do in this sport. On the other side of that, he was a winger who definitely, and I don't necessarily buy the idea that even back in his prime that Ovechkin wasn't the kind of guy that didn't elevate his line mates. Like
I never understood that.
I don't know how you could see, and while yes, he's always been a prolific scorer, go back and watch highlights of the dude from 2011 and tell me he wasn't an absolute machine all over the ice. And whether
also,
it was,
if you're scoring 50 goals a season, the beneficiaries are your line mates.
Right.
Look at, does Backstrom have the years that he has without Ovechkin on his line?
No, and that's not to take anything away from Backstrom.
No, but
either.
that's my point. He elevated Backstrom, and I think Backstrom helped him too. I think it was a yin and yang thing, but I never bought that Ovechkin didn't elevate his teammates. I think that's complete BS.
I don't really buy that. But he's a very interesting case because he was a wing, or he is a winger. I do value center play more than winger play. I know that's some of the like forward thinking thought process, I guess, is that positional stuff doesn't really matter.
There's a reason
as much,
why centers make the money they make, man.
Yeah. On the other side of that, I could get into an argument talking about why defensemen really don't matter as much, but that's an argument for maybe we'll do that here if the Penguins suck again for the next week. Next week we're not going to talk about the Penguins.
Of Danny's hot takes about the game of hockey.
Yes, we will. I promise we will do that next week if the Penguins continue to suck here over this next until we record. What the hell was I just saying? Ovechkin, yeah. So it's really interesting to me because while he does have the goal scoring, the point totals haven't always been there. And when I say the point totals haven't always been there, like there was a point in time where we had 2 or 3 consecutive seasons where he dipped below a point per game. And again, when you're talking about the greatest, Ovi doesn't have the achievements at the team level or the international level that someone like Crosby does. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard for me because on one hand, it's like someone who is the greatest scorer in this sport's history deserves to be on the sports Mount Rushmore, right? But then you look at
the sports Mount Rushmore,
and it's legitimately hard to make a case to put him over anybody except for maybe Sid. But I like maybe it's our bias here, but
here's how I've always justified the thing with Sid and Ovechkin. Okay, Ovechkin, clear-cut better goal scorer than Crosby, and I know Penguins fans will come back with, well, if Sid wanted to score and wanted to be a selfish player, he would have been. But that's not how he played his game. That's not how it played out in reality, and I'm dealing with reality. Ovechkin was a better goal scorer than Sidney Crosby for the entirety of their career. With that said, you brought up Ovechkin's international record, right, and the lack of success. You brought up the fact that he only has one Stanley Cup. And look, I say only one Stanley Cup. You win the Stanley Cup, it's a big deal. But Sid has 3, Ovi has 1.
Well, and you go back to 2018. What was the knock on Ovi that he hasn't won a cup yet? He hasn't won a cup. Yeah. He's a playoff joker. He can't lead a team to a cup, and then he wins it, and it's
who beat him head to head 3 times in the NHL playoffs? Sidney Crosby. Which team took the gold in the 2 Olympics that they played against each other in?
I'm glad you said this because we're going to finish this episode with a little story time.
Okay. My point with all of that is Ovechkin would have had all of that success if it wasn't for Sidney Crosby. And so I cannot, in good faith, put him above Sidney Crosby because Sidney Crosby is the one that, in most of those cases, beat Alexander Ovechkin.
Yeah, I maybe in some very, very convoluted way, I could talk myself into putting Ovechkin ahead of Crosby for the sole fact that he's the greatest at something, and I don't know that you could necessarily say Crosby is the greatest playmaker of all time. You could maybe say he's the greatest grinder of all time, but he doesn't really like that notion about himself, and I think it is honestly diminishes
what he actually
does.
I got to wrap this up so you can get into story time.
I have a very good story.
I have Ovi in my top 10.
Oh, easily. Like
probably 7 or 8.
Yeah, and there's definitely wiggle room there to make cases for him to slide in or swap with those other guys that are in that mix as well.
I think if you bring up longevity, I think Yager's name has to be in that conversation. Yzerman for me is 100% in that conversation. Probably Nicholas Lindstrom for me. I'll probably would throw his name in there. And then Ovechkin. And from there, I think it really starts to get cloudy of like who you want to, can you clearly put this player over this player? I think that's where it starts to break down. But anyways, I think McDavid will be in this conversation very, very soon if he isn't already. Story time with Danny. Starts with a question, actually. Do you remember, this was maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, Rob Rossi wrote the story about Ovechkin and Crosby? Yes. What a quote by Ovechkin, by the way. 100% true.
That they saved the league?
Yeah, 100% true. For me, like as a young kid, like I was 12, I was 14, 15?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up watching them own the league.
Dude, I was a hockey fan and I was going to be a hockey fan. Those two set it over the top. I mean, that goal Ovechkin scored against the Coyotes is just, I mean, that's burned in my memory. You know, the stuff that Sid was doing is burned in my memory. Like, absolutely just, they brought a whole different level to the NHL. But anyway, I'll quit derailing you.
So, you know how Ovechkin said that part of what propelled him and the Caps to winning the Cup was kind of modeling himself after Crosby's game, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not that simple.
Oh.
And I'm about to tell you why.
Oh, here we go, people.
So this was, I want to say it was Penguins Development Camp 2022, if I'm having my timelines correct here. No, it was Penguins Training Camp 2022 going into the 22-23 season. A long day. There's also we're out at the Lemieux complex. It's like a super long day because they got stuff going on in the morning and they got like 3 teams and they're all split up and they got different ice times and it bleeds into the afternoon and there's all kinds of stuff going on.
It really tests if you actually do like hockey or not.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No question about it. There was also a USHL tournament going on.
I remember. I was there doing photography and some video work there, and I remember the tournament. Just parents everywhere. Yeah,
parents everywhere, and like USHL coaches and scouts,
ex-NHL guys with their kids. Yeah,
million people there. Anyway, at the Lemieux complex, the media has like their own little section at the top of the bleachers where they've got like outlets and a little stand to put your laptops. I was sitting up there just randomly working, and I get a guy that came up behind me, and like he must have seen that I had my work up or whatever, and he came over and started asking me about. This was obviously when I was still working the beat. Guy came up, started chatting with him a little bit, and next thing you know, he's telling me about how he's very good friends with Lane Lambert. Lane Lambert is the current Islanders head coach who was an assistant coach under Barry Trotz with the Capitals when they won the Cup.
Okay.
The year the Capitals won the Cup, they played the Blue Jackets in the first round. At the conclusion of that, it was either at the conclusion of that series or like a game prior to the conclusion of that series before the Capitals beat the Blue Jackets. Trotz and Lambert were like not happy with the way Ovechkin had started the postseason. So they called him into Trotz's office and they sat him down and they said, Ovi, look, this is going to go one of 2 ways and it's on you about which way this goes. And Ovi's just kind of staring at him. Apparently attached to Trotz's office or like right next to Trotz's office is a video room or something like this. Or maybe they did this in Trotz's office. But Trotz and Lambert essentially locked Ovechkin in a room with a bunch of Sidney Crosby film and locked him in there until he came out. And when Ovechkin came out of the room, he just kind of looked at him and walked right by him, didn't throw a stink, didn't make a big deal about it at all, and then the Caps went on to win the Cup.
So if it wasn't for Sidney Crosby, he wouldn't have even won his Stanley Cup, is what you're saying.
I'm not going to go that far, but the influence is significant.
Sidney Crosby is the reason why the Washington Capitals won the Stanley Cup. That's what I'm going with.
We could definitely spin it that way.
There it is. So even his Stanley Cup that he won, he couldn't have done it without Crosby, and that's why Crosby's the better player.
That's a pretty good story, though, right?
It's a great story.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah, I haven't been able to tell it for a while because, one, I was working the beat, and two, that other dude, the dude who told me this, like, I wasn't going to just, like, out him like that either.
Yeah.
But, yeah, no, like, the influence there, I think, is a lot bigger. Maybe not more... I don't think it's bigger than a lot of people realized at the time, but I think it's bigger than a lot of people realize now.
All joking aside, though, I think that's what makes these guys great. Because a guy like Ovechkin, whose entire career has been built around goal scoring, can go into one meeting, watch video of another player who is an elite player, all-time elite player, say, okay, if I'm going to win, I've got to be more like him, and does it. Goes and actually does it on the ice. Doesn't just say, okay, cool, that's nice, and then go back to doing his old thing. He's good enough at the game of hockey to, on the fly like that, change it up and still be dominant. That, all joking aside, with the Sid thing, like, that's amazing that Alex Ovechkin can do that kind of thing. Like, that's what makes me just in all of these guys.
Well, and I hate how much you and I both bring up the Steelers on this podcast. It sounds like, or it feels like we find a way to do it every week.
The Steelers might have a hockey score this week.
Yeah, I'm not talking about that at all. The one thing I do want to bring up as it relates to the Steelers, though, whenever they aren't doing well in a specific component of the game or in a general sense, what are they always saying? Oh, we just got to work harder. We got to keep working. We got to work harder. And,
right.
and in a general sense in sports, I think that's often the common sentiment when things go wrong. But to your point about what Ovechkin was able to do about just going and sitting down and watching film, that is freakish. Either brain power for the sport and skill to be able to do that, because that isn't necessarily working harder. That's not spending an extra 45 minutes out after practice working on digging pucks off the wall. And not to say he wasn't doing those things,
but to be able to watch it at that level and say, oh, this is what I have to do.
Right.
Yeah, the IQ there is through the roof. Before we get going and we end this episode, I do have to bring one thing up. And we talk about off the rails. We're going all the way to the other side of the country. What the hell is going on in Arizona?
They've been just stepped all over for so long that they were kind of reaching Cleveland Browns territory, where it's just like, oh, this team, they're never going to be good. They're always going to find a way to stumble. But I really like their group of forwards going into this season.
That's the thing, man. It's like I don't think it's smoke and mirrors. I think maybe they're a year or two ahead of schedule, but they're actually kind of good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna all of a sudden put them up toe to toe with like the Kings, for instance. But
no, but they might. I think they probably squeak into the playoffs if they keep.
It's tracking like they're gonna be in the mix.
Now, is that good for hockey?
Why wouldn't it be?
Where they're playing,
where they're playing is not good for hockey.
And that's my point. Like, this is where the NHL can't get out of its own way. You have
this is where I think we could point to a million reasons, but yes, you're right.
You have what could be top 5 story of the last 5 or 10 years if the Coyotes were to make it to the playoffs, and it's going to be completely ruined when people see that in arena experience and have to watch hockey games like they're watching a high school basketball game, like at the level that the cameras are. And it's so frustrating to me that the NHL could not figure this out and is going to ruin a good story for a fan base that deserves a good story. The diehard Coyotes fans that have stuck around and have put up with all of the BS that they've had to put up with, and now their team is finally, relevant, and they've knocked off the last 5 Stanley Cup champs. They're on a 6-game winning streak, and the teams that they've beat are legitimately good teams.
They've got like a plus 13 goal differential on the season. And that, I know I'm a big analytics, fancy stats, numbers nerd guy, but goal differential is one of the biggest indicators of future postseason success.
Yeah, it's wild that it's happening. Shout out Logan Cooley, West Mifflin kid.
I still can't get over that. I know it was a preseason game. That goal he scored in the preseason. Oh my God. And seeing that and just thinking about some of the nasty goals that we're going to score as more and more guys like Cooley start to come into the league here.
Yeah.
It's really exciting.
I am excited for the NHL from a player standpoint. The dude from Detroit who scores the game-winning goal and does the gritty.
Jake Wallman.
Yeah, Jake Wallman.
He did that against the Penguins last year too.
But there's finally some personality. Austin Matthews is quiet, but he's on. He
expresses himself.
Yeah, he expresses himself. He's on magazines, covers, and stuff like that. And PK Subban started bringing that kind of flavor into the NHL. And you've got these young dudes now who aren't afraid to be in the spotlight, and it's so needed for this sport. And I just hope that the old school, that Canadian guard doesn't try to snuff that out, because this sport needs a little bit of a facelift. It needs some excitement and some joy. So people showing that they're having fun.
Well, when you have league scandals and
right.
banning pride nights and you name it every other week, it can get a little bleak.
Yeah, but it's good to see the players fighting back that kind of stuff. The NHL tried to stop Fleury from wearing the helmet.
Oh, I love that.
Fleury was he just played chicken with them.
Yeah. But it's so
the kid
stupid.
over
it's
the
so
dude
stupid for the league to even.
That was in Toronto. He's not now. He was the first one to wear.
Travis Dermott.
Yeah, Travis Dermott, who said screw it with the pride tape, and he played chicken with the NHL and won. They didn't fine him.
Also,
these goalies with the cancer, the hockey fights cancer helmets, the purple helmets. There's been a couple goalies this season that have been we don't care. What's the NHL going to do? Fine them for being against cancer?
Well, that was my thing about the league telling Fleury he couldn't wear that mask during warm-ups because Fleury was like, "Oh, I'm going to do it anyway," and they're like, "Oh, we're going to impose this massive fine on the team." Why is the league putting itself in a position to make themselves look like that?
My honest opinion, I think this is the way they keep players quiet about other things that they don't want them to talk about.
I don't disagree with you there.
I think that there are things going on in the game of hockey right now that we don't know about, or that we probably have a hunch about, that the NHL doesn't want out. And I think if the players know that they can get fined for wearing a helmet, they're going to keep quiet about some other stuff.
Well,
I think it's a power.
Yeah,
no pun intended. A power play by the NHL.
Think about the people who are in power in the NHL. They probably don't have the same worldviews and opinions. Not to say that
and they probably were involved with some of the stuff that I would assume has happened in the NHL.
Well, yeah, they're involved, or at least, and this isn't everybody, but at least in some capacity, probably complicit.
Look, I'm not going to get into the whole Blackhawks scandal. Not the most recent one. The original one with Kyle Beach. Black Ace number 2 came forward now, just within the last couple months. He's come forward and talked about things, and he said that he was being made fun of, and people were saying some very vulgar things to him at practice. So you're telling me that Black Ace number 2 was getting made fun of in practices, but the general manager, the assistant general manager, the head coach, the captain, the assistant captain, that they all didn't know what happened?
No, they did know. They were just in the midst of a playoff.
But that's
run.
what they're saying is, we didn't know. So it's, again, the NHL was trying to keep things quiet. I'm not getting into this whole conspiracy theory thing with the NHL.
I don't even think, dude, I get that, but it's not a conspiracy. That is
frustrating to see a sport like hockey that is, in my opinion, it is one of the most fun and just compelling sports. And we have a league that just doesn't know how to, do it, get out of its own way and advertise it and promote it correctly. I mean, take a book out of the NBA's page, or take a page out of the NBA's book, because like the NBA is doing everything right lately, aside from these courts for the awful. Yeah.
Somebody made a really good point.
Need sunglasses to wear to watch a Chicago Bulls game, or the red court. Who puts a red? Well, maybe not have been the Bulls. But
I don't keep up with the NBA a whole lot during the regular season. I start to pay attention when the playoffs roll around. But like, I can flip a game on at any point during the regular season and be like, oh, I know these two teams, and like I'm familiar with the players. During these in-season tournament games, let alone with the courts and how awful they are and what they look like, I don't even know who's playing.
I saw a screen grab. It was Indiana and it was Boston and Utah, and I thought it was Indiana and like Chicago. It was like, what? How? And the whole thing of the screen grab was like, it sucks that we can't tell just by the uniforms. Yeah. Like, yeah, I can. And I looked down at the scoreboard, like, oh no, it's not. But again, point being, the NFL seems to know how to market itself. The NBA seems to know how to market itself. Baseball doesn't know what it wants to do. And the NHL just can't. They just can't get out of their own way. They're just terrible at it. And it's time for new management in the NHL. It's time for Bettman to retire and go somewhere. Go back to his little troll rock that he crawled out from under. And that's my spiel on the NHL.
I did not expect this episode to go the way that it went at all, but I'm totally cool with how it went.
You didn't even say anything about my Mighty Ducks jersey.
Why do I have to bring it up?
Why not?
You're the one wearing it.
Yeah. Shout out to my wife, Marissa. It's the first gift she ever bought me. It's a personalized Mighty Ducks jersey from the movie.
And you made her cry.
We're not going to talk about me making my wife cry.
All right. Well, I'll wrap us up here. For Eddie Provident, I am Danny Shirey. This is the Breakdowns and Breakaways podcast. Make sure to go subscribe to breakdownsandbreakaways.substack.com. We'll catch you again next week.
That was Lessians.